Close your eyes for a moment. Picture a grey British morning, drizzle on the windscreen, the smell of damp tarmac, a row of terraced houses, and the quiet rumble of an engine warming up on the curb. These were ordinary mornings. Ordinary cars. And somehow, without anyone noticing, they vanished. But where did they all go? Britain's roads were once alive with a very particular kind of character. Not supercars, not concept vehicles, just honest, hard-working machines that carried families to school, couples on their first holidays, and workers through every kind of British weather imaginable. These were the cars that defined the daily rhythm of this island, parked outside corner shops and council estates alike, as familiar as a red postbox or a greasy spoon cafe. Today, we're counting down 10 of those cars, the ones you saw every single day, that have now all but disappeared from British streets. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe, because there are many more where this came from. And trust me, number 1 will hit you right in the chest. Number 10. Austin Maxi. The Austin Maxi was the car of the practical family, the kind of people who needed space, reliability, and not much else. Launched in 1969 by British Leyland, it arrived with genuine ambition, a 5-door hatchback at a time when most British families were still squeezing luggage through narrow boot openings. Its 1.5-litre overhead camshaft engine was reasonably modern for its era, and its fully folding rear seats created a flat load area that felt almost revolutionary on British roads of the time. You'd see it outside grammar schools and outside bingo halls in equal measure. Inside, it smelled of bactine and biscuit crumbs, and the gear change, mounted on a long, slightly vague stalk, had a character all of its own. It was never glamorous, it was never celebrated, but for hundreds of thousands of British households, the Maxi was simply there, dependably and without complaint. Number 9. Vauxhall Cavalere MK2. Few cars understood the rhythm of 1980s Britain quite like the Vauxhall Cavalere Mark II. It was the company rep's chariot, the middle manager's badge of mild achievement, the car that populated every motorway services car park from Watford Gap to Scotch Corner. Launched in 1981, it came in saloon and hatchback form, powered by a range of engines that balanced economy with just enough performance to feel purposeful on the M1. It wasn't beautiful, but it had a kind of clean, composed confidence about it. Inside, the velour seats held the warmth of 1,000 long journeys, and the dashboard had that particular 80s blend of plastic optimism and brown trim. The Cavalier outsold almost everything in its class for years because it asked very little of its driver and delivered almost everything it promised. A car that kept Britain moving, quietly and without fuss. Number 8. Ford Escort MK3. The Ford Escort Mark III was everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. When it arrived in 1980, Ford had essentially rewritten what a small family car could be for working Britain. The sharp, angular body replaced the rounded curves of earlier Escorts with something that felt crisp and contemporary. Under the bonnet, the CVH engine was efficient, eager, and dependable, qualities that mattered enormously to buyers who needed their car to start on a frosty Tuesday morning without drama. From the XR3 that sat on alloy wheels outside the youth club to the base model L that ferried children to swimming lessons, the Escort existed in a dozen different social contexts simultaneously. The driving position was upright, the steering light, and the whole experience was refreshingly uncomplicated. It smelled of carpet and Radio 1, and it carried an entire generation's early memories pressed into its fabric like photographs in a wallet. Number 7. Rover 213 and 216. When Rover and Honda shook hands in the early 1980s, the result was the Rover 200 series, a car that was quietly, unexpectedly excellent. The 213 and 216 arrived in 1984, wearing Rover's traditional grille and walnut effect interior trim over what was essentially a refined Honda platform. For buyers who wanted to feel a little more distinguished than a Ford Escort suggested, the Rover 200 was a compelling answer. Its 1.3 and 1.6-litre Honda-derived engines were smooth and free-revving in a way that British engines rarely achieved at the time. You'd find them parked outside golf clubs and dental practices, chosen by people who equated the Rover badge with a kind of quiet respectability. The interior, with its leather-look trim and soft lighting, felt genuinely premium. That combination of Japanese engineering and British character produced something genuinely worth remembering. Number 6. Talbert Horizon. The Talbot Horizon was the car that time forgot, not because it was dreadful, but because everything around it moved on too quickly. Introduced in 1977 as a Chrysler before the badge change, it offered a roomy, practical hatchback for a Britain that was still getting used to the idea of front-wheel drive family cars. Its interior was generous by the standards of the day, and the driving experience was inoffensive in that particular way that made it genuinely easy to live with. You'd see Horizons outside comprehensive schools and beside allotments, driven by people who bought a car for what it did rather than what it said about them. The badge changed from Chrysler to Simca to Talbot in what felt like a corporate identity crisis, and eventually the car simply faded. But for a decade, it was woven into the fabric of ordinary British life. Number 5. Vauxhall Astra MK1. When the original Vauxhall Astra arrived on British roads in 1980, it felt like a genuine statement of intent. Based on the Opel Kadett platform, it brought sharp European styling to a market that had been fed rounded, conservative shapes for too long. The 3- and 5-door hatchback bodies looked modern against anything else in a typical British car park, and the range of petrol engines, from the modest 1.2 to the more spirited 1.6, gave buyers real choice. In an era when British Leyland was struggling and Ford was dominant, the Astra offered something different, a car that felt properly European without feeling alien. Families chose it for its practicality, younger buyers chose it for its looks. On a damp Saturday morning outside a Midlands shopping centre, the Astra was as much a part of the scenery as the pound shop and the pie stand. Number 4. Morris Marina. The Morris Marina is a car that history has treated unkindly, and perhaps not entirely without reason. Launched in 1971 by British Leyland, it arrived as a conventional, conservative saloon and coupe designed to compete with Ford in the fleet and family market. It used a live rear axle at a time when rivals were moving to more sophisticated suspension, and the result was a handling character that required a certain patience from its driver. And yet, the Marina sold. It sold in very large numbers to very ordinary British people who needed a car, not a performance benchmark. You'd see them in every shade of harvest gold and olive green, parked outside factories and post offices, reliable in the way only uncomplicated things can be. It was never loved, rarely praised, but the Marina was present, stubbornly, honestly present, throughout an entire decade of British life. Number 3. Austin Allegro. Few cars carry as much emotional baggage as the Austin Allegro. Introduced in 1973 as the replacement for the beloved 1100 and 1300, it arrived with questionable styling, a controversial square steering wheel on early models, and a reputation for unreliability that British Leyland could ill afford. But here is what the history books sometimes forget: the Allegro was genuinely innovative in certain respects. Its Hydroga suspension, developed from Alec Issigonus's original thinking, delivered a ride quality that genuinely floated over Britain's scarred road surfaces in a way rivals could not match. Inside, it was spacious for its size. And the range, from the base 1.1 to the twin-carburetor 1750 Sport, gave it genuine breadth. Millions of British families drove Allegros because they were affordable and available. The smell of that interior, the sound of that A-series engine at tickover, for a generation, that was simply what a car smelled and sounded like. Number 2. Ford Cortina MK4 and MK5. To understand Britain in the 1970s and early 1980s, you have to understand the Ford Cortina. The Mark IV and Mark V variants, known internally as the Taunus-derived generation, dominated the bestseller charts year after year with an authority that no rival could seriously challenge. Every taxi firm, every company fleet, every family upgrading from something smaller seemed to land on the Cortina as the obvious answer. Its 1.6 and 2.0-litre Pinto engines were familiar, serviceable, and abundant in every garage in the land. The interior, upholstered in cloth that varied from utilitarian to almost plush depending on trim level, was where British family life was largely conducted throughout an entire decade. Long drives up the A1, foggy motorway runs with a thermos of tea on the back seat, the creak of the vinyl dashboard on a hot August afternoon. The Cortina wasn't a car you chose with your heart. It was a car Britain chose, collectively, by instinct. Number 1. British Leyland Mini. And so we arrive at the one that sits at the very center of Britain's automotive soul. The original Mini, the car Alec Isigonis sketched in response to the Suez Crisis, the car that redefined what small could mean, the car that crossed every class boundary this country had ever drawn. Launched in 1959 and built in largely the same fundamental form until 2000, the Mini was not merely a car. It was a social event. You saw it parked outside Carnaby Street boutiques in the 1960s and outside mining cottages in the 1980s. Royalty drove it. Students drove it. Racing drivers took it to circuits and embarrassed machines twice their size. The transverse engine and front-wheel drive layout, revolutionary at the time, packed genuine mechanical ingenuity into just 10 feet of bodywork. Inside, the rubber-floored cabin was cramped, characterful, and alive in a way that modern cars have largely forgotten how to be. The engine note was a chirpy, high-revving mechanical song that you recognized from 3 streets away. Driving a classic Mini was not like driving, it was like being in conversation with a road. It felt every surface, communicated every camber, and asked its driver to be present in a way that modern cars simply do not. For over 40 years, it was everywhere in Britain. Now, genuinely original, unrested examples are almost impossible to find. The Mini didn't just represent an era. It was the era. These 10 cars were not just machines. They were the background music of British life, present in photographs you barely remember taking, parked in the driveways of houses you grew up in, filling roads that have since been widened or redirected or forgotten entirely. They carried first days at school and last drives home. They broke down on bank holiday weekends and somehow always got going again. They smelled of their time in a way that nothing else quite can. And now, almost without ceremony, they are gone, or nearly so. The scrapyard took most of them. A few survive in collections. Fewer still are driven daily as they once were. Britain moved on, as Britain always does, leaving behind a particular kind of quiet that only those who remember these roads can fully understand. If any of these cars brought something back for you, leave a comment below. We would genuinely love to hear your stories. Like this video if it took you somewhere unexpected, and subscribe to Britain Rewind so you never miss the next journey down Britain's forgotten roads.